Happy New Year! Ready to make it the most audacious yet? Following a wonderfully festive break, we're feeling recharged and we're back for another episode of the Inspiring Women in CX podcast, a series usually dedicated to real talk conversations between women in customer experience. This series, we're putting some of our awesome allies in the hot seat too. No longer rehashing the same old conversations. In Series 7, you can expect us to challenge the status quo on CX topics, provocative discourse, and of course, plenty of healthy debate. I'll be your host, Clare, and in today's episode, I'll be talking to one of our longest standing allies, and you might recognise him. He's a certified customer experience professional, global CX specialist, and has spent over 25 years in business improvement. To date, he's supported organisations and professionals in 59 countries to better understand how to operationalise the science of CX. A renowned keynote speaker and award host, let me introduce you to today's inspiring guest. It is, of course, Mr. Ian Golding. Hi, Ian.
Hello, Claire.
So lovely to have you on the Inspiring Women in CX podcast as one of our first allies to appear on this show. So we're making history, Ian. How do you feel about that?
As always, I am honoured, Claire, delighted, as I was to be one of only two allies at the conference in October as well. I'm just delighted that I can continue to support what you're doing and vice versa, as always.
Well, we're absolutely gloriously grateful that you're here with us today and everything that you've been doing for women in CX community. And I'm sure we're going to go into lots of more detail about that on the show today. But also, hello, listeners. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're excited for this episode of the podcast and the fact that we're now introducing even greater gender diversity into women in CX with this podcast episode. So I thought, Ian, we go back quite a long way, don't we? You and I.
We do to a cafe very near to the British Museum, I think it was.
It was.
Is that right? It was near the British Museum.
It was Pret-a-Manger, in fact.
Was it Pret-a-Manger?
It was Pret-a-Manger.
I don't remember those specifics, but then my aging brain forgets details like that.
Yeah. Oh, and when was it? It's 2018, I think.
Was it really? Blimey.
Yeah. A couple of years pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Do you remember why we first met?
I remember you. I can't remember specifically how you contacted me, but I think you'll have to remind me if I'm wrong, but you reached out to me because you were looking to develop your independent company that you created, and you were very bold, I think, because I think it does take courage to reach out to others to just ask for guidance and advice and various other things. And as you know, if anyone asks me for help, I will do my very best to give them the benefit of my experience. I was going to say wisdom, but I'm not sure it's always wisdom. But my own experience is to see if I can help you to forge the right path for you. So I think that's how it all started.
It was. So I had recently left Sainsbury's. I'd made the decision I was going to start my own agency, or actually initially just to go solopreneur freelance. And I so often talk about you on this podcast and within the community because I reached out to so many people to ask for help, all the CX superstars and the influencers that I'd seen out there. And you were one of the only ones to actually come back and say, yeah, I'd be happy to help you. Really? And interestingly, at the time, that none of the women I'd reached out to said yes at all. They just thought,
interesting.
Yeah. Incoming competition, no thanks. But this became one of the reasons why I wanted to start Women in CX, because of that experience of having that help from you that initial time. I was like, we need more women doing this.
And at the time, there weren't really that many women, especially not in the UK.
The people I'd reached out to were in the US, admittedly, but definitely like I was breaking into the CX influencer space as one of the only women from the UK. So I
find it fascinating that there is, and it's still to this day actually, because I experienced it myself, that word competition. I find it sometimes frustrating, sometimes irritating that a very small community, because CX is a very small global community in relative terms, that people see each other as competition. The world is a big place. There's a lot going on out
Plenty to go around,
there. And,
indeed.
to me, I've always lived through collaboration. And so that's why I think if someone reaches out to me and says, can you guide me? If it's like, well, why wouldn't you? It just makes sense to be able to give people the benefit of the things you've gone through. And that's why it wouldn't have even crossed my mind not to meet with you, Claire. And as this conversation today demonstrates, I'm so pleased I did, because it was the start of a long, never-ending relationship as far as I'm concerned.
Aw, hey. But so true, and that's why collaboration became one of our core values. And I'm so proud to see how many women in the UK are now visible
Yes, that's true. I mean, it has
in comparison
changed
to 4 years ago.
remarkably,
Yeah.
and in all forms, not just independent consultants, but people within different organizations, different sectors. And actually, I've said to you before that I would say almost exclusively some of the best people I've ever worked
You
with
have said this to me before.
have been women. The best bosses I've ever had have been women. And whether or not that's coincidental, who knows? But I think genuinely, when I look back in my career, I have had so much pleasure learning from and working with women, as well as men. But as I say, some of the best people I've worked with have been women.
Yeah, me too. Why do you think that is then? Like, I know at conference we were talking about women typically have more empathy, relationship building interest, longer term
Uh,
viewpoints. Like,
I
not
mean,
every woman, obviously, but
that's right. And I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist or anything like that, but I think typically it is a generalization. Women do have a greater natural ability to empathize with others. Maybe that's related to motherhood. Now, I know obviously not every woman
not
is a
everyone's
mum,
aware there. No.
but whether it's an animal mum, so obviously your babies are your horses, Claire. So
And don't
whether
forget my cat.
and your cat, but I think women tend to have that natural nurturing instinct that not all men have. You're right to say, obviously, there are lots of women that don't.
Yeah.
But I think in general, women do tend to have that naturally within them. I spoke to someone yesterday and said, it's not a new question, but can you teach people to be empathetic, or is it something that's within you? And I think for most, it's something that's within you. You can educate people as to what empathy is, but caring about other people is it's not just important for customer experience, it's important in life. And as we can see right now with the horribly troubled world we live in, so many humans forget about the importance of caring for others. And that's why if we can be involved in communities where there is an overwhelming majority who want to care for others, whether that be supporting them, working with them, whatever it looks like, then I am 100% behind it. We need to bring humanity back into what we do.
Yeah, amen to that. And then our relationship. So obviously I then started my business, my original one team experience. Experienced quite a lot of success quite quickly. Started to move, I guess, in the same orbit then, didn't we? Of like speaking
Yes.
events and being asked to go onto panels together and being keynotes at the same events and stuff, which was like super exciting. But then we had the pandemic, didn't we? And I think
We
that's
did.
probably when we got closer, wasn't it? Because you basically had a pandemic CX community that you put
Yes.
together for us to support one another.
Don't know if you want to reflect a little bit on those
Yeah,
times.
it all feels a bit surreal now when you look back to it. But I think again, my natural instinct when the pandemic hit was we need to look after each other, because for many who were operating independently, that it was almost like Armageddon. We went from being incredibly busy to suddenly
Nothing.
everything stopped overnight. Now, obviously, I'd been operating for a long time by then, so to a degree, my network was much bigger than many. Added to the fact that I was always multinational, so bizarrely, even though we went into a pandemic, while certain things stopped for me, other things actually increased. So, but it was abundantly clear to me that this was not the case for most people. So I thought it would just make sense to just let's bring everyone together so people know they're not alone. One of the things you and I talked about on many occasions is how being in the world of CX is often very lonely. Either on the inside of an organization, because you're trying to change the mindset of people who don't want their mindsets changed, or as an independent, as a solopreneur. I mean, the clue is in the name. You're solo. It's
No
just you.
team. Yeah.
So,
No boss.
suddenly to go from lots of stuff to nothing, people needed to know they weren't alone. So we actually started a community that we ended up calling CX Cares.
Yeah.
It was truly international. We had people from Brazil and Russia and the Far East, all over the place. And once a week to start with, we would meet in a call and just support each other.
That newfangled Zoom thing that we were just learning how to use at the time.
Although that always made me laugh that the media said this new Zoom thing that we'd been using for years anyway.
It felt new to me. I definitely didn't used to have meetings on Zoom. It was always in person or like on the phone.
Yeah. But it was, I don't know, that time was so important, I think, to just ensure that people knew they weren't alone and that we could support each other. And if we could find a way of generating income for each other, then that's what we would do. Obviously, for some, that was much harder than others. And I know I'm sure you don't mind me saying that for you, it was tough. I mean, a really tough period.
Yeah. I'd been out less than 2 years and everything was going brilliantly, but where I'd chosen to build my business was all on the other side of the world because I liked traveling as a digital nomad. So my clients were in like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. And everything that I did was in person. It was workshops, keynotes, like it depended very much on me being physically present.
That's right.
At the time, and it just dried up overnight. And I had nothing. Like I went from everything to nothing. A year's plan.
And it was bizarre. And I think that's why
I was definitely one of the people that you set that up for sure.
Well, I wanted to do what I could, and if I could have given money to people, I would have done. But we had to try and find a way of keeping ourselves motivated to keep going. This for me is what makes our global CX community, whatever gender we tend to be. I think the community is so important because there are many people like us who want to support and help each other. There are equally as many who don't, but I think the relationships we developed during 2020 and 2021, that those relationships last forever. And I think it was such a powerful time, and I'm delighted that we were able to keep people going, however hard it may have been at the time.
Yeah, I would just come with my little updates, wouldn't I, over those calls, and I had this idea. I think I'm going to start a podcast. I think I'm going to call it Women in CX. I've got nothing else to do. I think I'm going to try and amplify the voices of women.
Isn't
And
it funny to think that women in CX didn't exist
didn't
at the
exist.
beginning of that?
Didn't exist at the beginning of all that. It didn't. And I'd like come and give my little updates each week, and each week it'd be something more. And by the end, it was like, right, I'm going to be launching a membership community. But yeah,
And
I
the
did
rest is
find
history.
the rest is
And
but I
what's
did
great,
find
Claire,
great
is that
great
it's now
strength in.
coming back. You know, all of the stuff that disappeared, you know, the fact that you're now starting the consulting piece for women in CX, you know, it is brilliant that it never went away. You know, I think that's what we almost need to tell ourselves. We think it's gone, but it's just a
evolved.
it's just a pause, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need someone that you can rant at, that someone that will just listen, that gives you that strength to find a way of moving forward. And if I was just a tiny bit of that for you, Claire, then I'm delighted.
You're a big bit of that, because you also would meet up with me just one-to-one and let me talk about like the reality of what I was experiencing. So I was living by myself, wasn't I, as well? I wasn't around anybody.
Yeah.
And we'd have like offline catch-ups as well. But
Yes.
I think I know we talk a lot about like safe space community, don't we? And that women in CX definitely stands for that. And I definitely got to experience that through you and your support. And I'm just so proud that I managed to create an international community that does that, and its focus is about kindness and support.
You know, it's funny in business.
It definitely inspired me.
Well, in business, I think whether it's public sector or private sector, that feeling of being safe, you know, having a safe space. I think many employees don't have that. Many people don't feel that they're in an environment like that they've got people that they can reach out to and talk to, like we did. And for me, that's a problem. And so the fact that you've created a new community that is underpinned by that people can come together and talk about anything. You know, they can genuinely wear their heart on their sleeve and not be judged, but actually be guided and supported. It is wonderful, because the world is only going to get more complex and more difficult. And so I think what you are driving and continuing to evolve becomes ever more important going forward.
That's so kind of you to say, and thank you.
And now for a quick word from one of our sponsors. We are proud to be supported by Kantar, the world's leading evidence-based insight and consulting company. Kantar CX helps clients define customer and employee experience strategies, better understand their customers via measurement, and in turn improve business outcomes, driving true commercial ROI. To find out more about Kantar's CX practice, please visit the sponsor links on the homepage of womenincx.community. Now back to the episode.
I suspect maybe a bit of a cheeky question, but I know you're involved in every single CX community that exists. Is there anything that particularly stands out for women in CX that's different?
So
is it that
I know of most communities, so I'm not actively involved in all of them, but I know of most of them. And my view on all of these global communities is that they need to exist for the right reason. So the motivation behind them is important. Everyone knows that I have been involved with the CXPA from the very beginning. The reason why I was involved with the CXPA, because it was a not-for-profit association representing people like us that do what we do. And for me, that was a no-brainer. It wasn't commercially generating. Its motivation was all about us. Now, do I think that organization is doing a good job is a different matter, because is it still representing people like us? I'm not so sure. There are other organizations around the world who I am not completely convinced that their motivation is about people like us. I think their motivation fundamentally is about making money. It's not about doing the right thing for its members. And that bothers me, because we need somewhere that we can get the right support. the right exposure, the right level of visibility for what we do, because customer experience, employee experience, the human experience is still so vague for many organizations that there is still a huge amount more that's needed to be done that we can't do as individuals. We need the backing of things with credibility. So right now, I think the legacy organizations, if I can call them that, because they're still not that old, I think they are missing what needs to happen. I don't think they are doing a great job of it. Women in CX being the new kid on the block, so to speak. I suppose there are newer organizations now, but still a relatively new kid on the block. I think your motivation is very clear for people to see. However, I think there is still, unfortunately, a misunderstanding as to what women in CX is all about. Again, you and I,
Tell me more.
well, in the spirit of our, you mentioned my brutal and honest conversations, which are not, it's not a podcast. What I wanted was to have conversations like this with you that
just be
others
real.
could listen to, and let's stop prancing around this subject. Let's just say it as it is. And a lot of people have said to me, not on those conversations, but outside, what do you need women in CX for? Why do they need that? Now, 99 times out of 100, it's a man that says that, not a woman. So I just have to be very clear. And, I've always found it difficult to respond. What's the right response to that question? If I'm being totally honest with you, so how do I answer that? And actually, I needed to immerse myself into the conference in October to be able to answer the question, because I'm not a woman. Okay, quite clearly, just getting it out there. I'm not a woman. So can I claim to know what it's like to be a woman in CX? No, I don't know. Do I know what it's like to be a woman in business? No. I know what it's like to be a white heterosexual man in business, which in the UK means that most of the time it's relatively okay for someone like me. Now, I don't overthink it. I don't necessarily stop and reflect. I'm lucky to be a white heterosexual man, but I am. Now, immersing myself into that room in London a few weeks ago, it was very eye-opening for me, because I said to you before we did this call that I didn't see a room of women. Now, I didn't mean that to be a derogatory comment, but I just saw a room of people, because ironically, I don't, when I look at someone, I don't see color, gender, religion. We're just all people. But now, some might call me naive in saying that, but we are just all people. But I was in a room full of women, and I was for only a short part of the day, one of only two men in a room full of women. And what became abundantly clear to me as the day went on is how refreshing it was, and I use the word refreshing intentionally, to see a group of people who just happened to be women talking so openly and honestly, really exposing vulnerability, almost honesty, to the point that I started to ask myself, would I be in an environment with so much natural authenticity if that room was mixed gender? And I never thought I would think that, because I didn't have any preconceived view of how I would feel about it. But I saw a room full of people who felt safe to say what they wanted to say without any fear of judgment or any sense that people would ridicule them or look at them with a funny expression on their face. And it made me realize that actually for people to have an environment where they feel able to be themselves is critical. And I maybe had never really appreciated that maybe women in business, women in organizations can't always truly be themselves. I don't know if what I'm saying makes any sense to you, but this is just sort of what was going through my mind.
It does, and that's your perspective on the world, right? And how you experienced what it was like to be in a room full of women. And in your experience, it didn't mean that you saw gender or color or anything else. But I guess, not to challenge you personally, because I know your intentions are nothing but pure, but it tends to be people who are white men, who are straight, who are non-disabled, that don't see color, don't see gender, don't see, because you don't have to. Whereas if you are non-white, non-male, non-binary,
Did you know,
with different sexuality, you do see
I think
it.
it's a brilliant point.
When I stand in a room as a woman in a room full of men, I can tell you I feel very uncomfortable. And I know when there's only a few women around, and I got used to that, working in business or as a speaker or when I go to these big technology events, but it still feels uncomfortable. And I love that you were able to stand in a room full of women and feel completely comfortable. But the reality is, for many of us, when we're the odd one out, and obviously I'm a white woman, so I don't have as many of the biases as my sisters in Women in CX who are more diverse, so
you make a brilliant point, Claire.
It's when you don't experience it directly, you don't know. So
you're absolutely right. That point about I don't look for it. I don't know if those are the exact words you use, but you're right. If I'd have been in a I don't know, a disabled people's conference, people, everyone in the room was in wheelchairs, again, unless you're in an environment like that, it comes back to this point about empathy. You see, I like to think I'm empathetic, but I think I am to a degree. But unless you, as many customer experience professionals will say, put yourself in those people's shoes and see it through their eyes, can you truly understand what it feels like to be there?
And I personally don't think so. So I challenge empathy as a concept, even in customer service and customer experience. I think it's a laudable target to aim for. But I think compassion is a way better definition than empathy, because I cannot know what it feels like to be you. I cannot know what it feels like to be a man walking around in this world as a male. Sounds like it'd be really fun, but hey, I will never get to know what that feels like.
As fun as it sounds.
Like I don't know, I never know what it feels like to walk around this ground. Like I cannot empathize for that, but I can have compassion and see and appreciate what someone else is going through that's different to me. And
I agree with you. You see, because
that's part of the misunderstanding when have about women in CX.
Well, the thing is, all women, all people have vulnerabilities in some way. I mean, that people find it hard to believe that I am a massive introvert, but I am, and actually I find conferences really difficult because I have to talk to people. And a lot of people, what do you mean? That's what you do all the time. But actually, it's unnatural for me. Being on a stage is enacting, but when I come off the stage, I want to hide in a corner and not have anyone talk to me. Now, some people look at me as like, well, what do you mean? That's just weird. So no, it isn't. Unless you understand what it's like to be, to feel that way, you can't understand it. And I have, so I'll be very transparent with you on this podcast, because it's the only way I can be. I have Asperger's. Now,
thank you for sharing that.
Does it matter? No. Is it a label? To a degree, yes, it is. But that's why it explains a lot about why I do what I do and how I do what I do. But because I just have to just focus on doing what makes me feel okay. And there are so many things that make me feel very uncomfortable. And that's maybe why, being in that room a few weeks ago, I felt completely comfortable, because I was actually as close to being like that community as I could be, because I was in a room with people who I knew weren't going to judge me, weren't going to look at what I was wearing, or think, is he an alpha male, or is it? People weren't looking at me like that, and so that's probably why I felt very relaxed in that environment. But this again is why I think I completely agree with you. Compassion is where we need to get to, but it's why it's so critical. But unfortunately, it is so lacking in so many parts of our lives, whether it's business or outside.
Yeah, and I guess like the example you started this conversation with, of so many guys that get their knickers in a twist about women in CX even existing and questioning why it needs to be here, without having any understanding of what it's like to live and work as a woman in business. Like,
yeah, that's right.
Just to automatically write it off, because I know there's one guy that goes around saying that we defy the objective of our community by being a gendered community, by not including men in a women's safe space. That means therefore that we're being sexist, and I think that's just ridiculous. And I will happily defend
but again,
why safe spaces for women only are needed.
It's a blatant lack of understanding, but we'll always have that. We will always live in a world where people will judge others, but that, I think, contradicts that person's argument, and it makes your community even more important.
Yeah, but I think it just is the example of why communities like this do need to exist, because of that complete lack of understanding.
That's right.
Of other people's experience, and providing psychological safety where women experience sexism and gender-related violence, like not necessarily saying we talk about that kind of thing all the time in the community, but within sexism is in like sexual harassment, assault, like these things don't typically happen to guys in the workplace the way that they do to women. I'm not saying that they don't, and the societal conditioning that women experience because of our gender. So we've got to be pretty and likable and smile all the time, and everyone has to think you're this wonderful goddess, or you're and you have to be like, look this certain way and act this certain way. And women's power is not the same as male power, right? In how we're evaluated for our worth. So we have to work that much harder. And even the ones of us with pretty privilege, that can be a negative, because then you're assumed because you're successful because of the way you look, not because of who you are. And if you don't have those looks, it's going to be even harder for you to become successful. And that just isn't, it doesn't happen to guys. And I can't wait for the day where women's communities are not needed, because that means that we'll live in a world where this shit does not happen, and we will have reached equality. And I cannot wait for that day when we don't need women's organizations.
I don't think it's ever going to happen.
We're a very, very long way off. But you know what, I really appreciate you having that conversation with me that I don't think many men would dare to.
Sorry to interrupt your listening, but I just wanted to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about Wix. We're the world's first online membership community for women in customer experience. Our mission is clear, and that's to unleash the power of women to lead the future of human-centered business. Working in CX can feel lonely at times. We're often single-handedly trying to change the way organisations think and behave about customers. On our paid platform, you can discover a vibrant tribe of fellow female professionals, find support from knowledgeable peers, learn best practices from experts and practitioners, and be inspired to up your game through leading-edge CX and EX thinking. If you feel like you aren't making enough progress with your CX objectives, are unsure about what your next move looks like, or are struggling to achieve your career ambitions, you're not alone. To learn more about membership, see how women are progressing personally and professionally with the support of the #1 community in CX, you can apply to join us today by visiting www.wix.com.
womenincx.community/membership. I really hope I get to see you there soon.
I think
But
our
what? But
relationship.
again, but that's you
Well,
see.
no, because I think they worry, are they going to say the wrong thing? And that's not because they're coming from a bad place, but the fear around talking about sexism, racism, anything like that. A lot of the reasons why the conversations don't happen is because people are scared.
Do you know? Do you know what part of the problem is? And when you just think of global politics right now, let's not get into a political conversation, but that the world has become so divisive. So it's either you're on one side or the other. Everything is an argument, but actually why? We can all have different perspectives and different opinions, but it's about healthy conversation and healthy debate and seeing other people's perspectives. It's one of the things that defines customer experience as a discipline, that there's no right or wrong. There's just interpretation. There's an interpretation of a scenario, and you need to understand that scenario to understand how best to deal with it. And I think we need to try and find a way of becoming less hostile as a global community in business and outside of business, and just start working together to solve problems, not to create them. I know it's a bit of a nirvana statement, but that's what I would love the world to become.
Yeah, and I'm a pragmatist, so I guess my reality I need to present reality as it is more of a powerful drive for me to think,
Yes.
how do we move from where we are today necessarily, then how do we get to
I agree.
here?
I agree.
But for me, my experience of the CX industry is that it is highly political, and the ultimate issue, I think, is that people can't hold two ideas in their mind at the same time. That two things can be true, that it's not either or, it's not black or white. There's this grey area that you can still find answers in. Like, so the least successful CX professionals I encounter are the ones that are fighting against organizations for something they see as the answer.
Yes.
And trying to force fit what they've learned as a framework into an organization that's either not ready for it, can't see the value of it, is never going to buy into it, and then they end up as individuals feeling like they're failures, and that's not their fault, right?
I
but by believing that there is only one way to do things, or that like CX is this thing we have to get people to understand, rather than going, I've got a skill set here that can help release more value for people to match this organizational goals. How do I do that? And for me, that is a shift that we need to see in the world.
100%. I've said for years, customer experience is a science, but it's not an exact science. And it's our ability to interpret how to apply it to whatever situation we face. It is the real skill set of what we do.
Yeah. So, for example, in 2024, you heard this at conference, but we're going to be launching practical magic courses for women, and it's not going to be a CX course that already exists. We're focusing on, like, how do you build confidence and resilience? How do you understand and navigate environments that can quite often be hostile in the workspace? How do you develop your impact and influencing skills to be able to convey information? Actually, how do you become a better project manager so you can show that there's a business case? How do you show, rather than this like utopian vision for customer experience that might take 5 years to get to, how do we also go, and in this year one, here's where we're going to focus, and this is the value that we can demonstrate, rather than it being like one thing or the other. So I'm so excited, I think it's brilliant to do something about it.
Because what you're describing are the historically unwritten competencies of this discipline.
I know
you can't do it without those things. But it's unfortunately, a lot of those things come under the banner of soft skills, which is such an awful expression, because they are anything but. But our ability to influence, our ability to build
Lead, I'd say.
self-awareness and confidence.
Yeah.
You know, I've said to you for a long time that courage, persistence, sheer bloody mindedness, you know, we need to have that in spades. And the best,
but also commercial awareness, financial acumen,
that's
all
right.
the bits that aren't part of these competencies as they're seeing today. And well, way of spilling the tea, being like super honest. Like what really worries me is this obsession with data metrics and ROI having become the uber competency and the place where most CX investment is now made.
But that is that there's a connection between what you are introducing and why ROI is the thing that everyone focuses on.
Well, look, hang on a second, sorry, just to check that. I'm not questioning whether ROI is important, it's everything, but not the ROI of customer experience as a thing in its own lane.
No,
like,
I agree with you.
That's the thing that everyone's trying to prove.
The problem there is very few people working within the world of CX, whether they be practitioners or people just with some kind of responsibility in CX, I think in general have done an extremely bad job of explaining, influencing, guiding leadership teams to understand what the outcome needs to be. So I think that the typical default for a business leader is show me the money, you know, and so we're just blindly trying to show them a number that we're not quite sure where the number's coming from. What we have not done a brilliant job at is really articulating to leaders how you get to those numbers, and where that benefit truly comes from, how long it takes to get there, what needs to happen for us to sustain the focus on it. You know, we haven't taken them on that journey typically, and so many leaders come to the conclusion that this doesn't work. Well, it does work, but it's I think that lack of cohesive influencing driven by authority that it's just not happening in general.
I have a different viewpoint. As I don't disagree with what you said. However, I think measurement frameworks like NPS have become a replacement for customer experience, and ROI is being promised to be attached to things like Net Promoter Score, which is unfounded. So I think there is a lot of blame is the wrong word, but fault in survey-based customer experience programs being sold as a panacea to revenue, because they're not. The important thing for me, and that, you know, where I spent my career in business, is actually taking action and improving things for 100%. Customers, or delivering more value for humans, and that's where the biggest commercial return is. But you're not going to see that as an outcome metric in NPS. Absolutely. You're going to see that in research and understanding what needs to change, stakeholder engagement, and being able to link. Okay, how do we understand the business strategy and deliver something against that? We're in complete
agreement, actually.
Okay, we're just phrasing it in different ways.
Well, it's what you're
and it doesn't have to be in 5 years' time. It can be now.
No. But you're bringing up quite rightly a very specific cause of the problem. But you know, those working in CX need to have the confidence, the courage to explain why we shouldn't be using NPS in that way, rather than just blindly carry on doing it. I had a conversation with a client that I've worked with for a few years yesterday, who's had a big restructure and change of leadership. And this new guy that's come in said, you know, why every year do we run the same NPS survey? You know, but and he's right, because it's wrong. What they're doing is fundamentally wrong. But you've got to have that strength and that courage of your convictions to stand up to leadership, not because you're being arrogant or, you know, aggressive, but because you understand what is required to become sustainably customer centric and deliver value for the customer, for the employee, for the organization. And if that means actually telling the organization that what we're doing isn't going to achieve that, that's what you've got to have the courage to be able to do. But I don't see enough of practitioners who are prepared to do that.
Do you think, Ian, that customer experience in its current state, as in what we define it to be now, is on the road to extinction? Because really what we're talking about, the value being in the future, is human experience, right? You've said that word so many times now.
Yes.
Not saying it's about changing the term, but has it become so myopic? And
I'm asked the question a lot, and my answer will always be no. It will never go extinct, in my opinion.
I don't have to change my t-shirt then. You don't have to change your sign in the background.
And it's just, and the simple principle is because if you just focus on customer experience for a second, customer experience has always existed. It always will exist.
Yeah.
Okay, that is just a reality.
Yeah, no, and I agree. Customers having experiences.
Employee experience. It's always existed. It always will do. It's less about CX becoming extinct and more about the way we adopt an approach to CX evolving. So we can't just focus on CX alone going forward. What we've got to understand is that harmonization of how the customer experience and employee experience comes together to deliver the value that the organization, its customers, its employees, and its shareholders need. You know, that I think for so long, and to a degree still to this day, all organizations really care about is the shareholder. You know, if we're being blunt, okay, do they really care about the customer? You know, the majority still don't. It's about financial return. Do they care about the employee? The majority don't really care about the employee. They want to know, how much money are we going to make? For us to be able to sustain organizations in the future, just focusing on shareholder return in the short term, for me, is not a sustainable strategy anymore. In a world where we are seeing more and more disruption, where technology is evolving faster than ever before and will only get faster and faster and faster, we cannot just chase numbers blindly in the short term. We have got to understand how we can sustain an organization in the long term, because that's where the real value will come from. And the only way we can deliver that is by truly understanding where the value comes from in itself. And that value is not just from the product or service that an organization sells. It comes from the ecosystem that it is sold within, an ecosystem that makes up the experience that the customer has in buying it, in using it, in rebuying it, as well as the ecosystem of people who design how they interact with the product and service, whether that be through a human directly or through technology. So what we do will never become extinct. I will argue it will become ever more important, but we've got to become more sophisticated in piecing the pieces of the puzzle together.
I'm making notes here because I have so much to say in response to this. This podcast is going to be like 4 hours long if we're not careful. So I think we're going to have to agree to do a part 2.
Okay.
So I think for me, the extinction isn't going to be of customer experience, as in customers and employees and humans will continue to have experiences. I agree with that. But I think what's going to become extinct is this frameworked approach to the competencies, as we've discussed today.
So tell me why.
Pardon?
Tell me why you think that.
Why? Because I think it's become so outdated because of the way businesses and customers and technology now operates, and the times have changed so much that those competencies aren't enough. And for example, like it means you have to become a customer-centric organization for it to even work, right? And the reality is there are product-centric organizations that can be market-oriented and still do an absolutely amazing job and deliver great experiences, but they're never going to become customer-centric because that's not the nature of them. You know, becoming more market-oriented is better than customer-centric for many. And that journey that I feel people coming into this industry or like learning about it think that the end goal is to turn a company customer centric, and if you don't achieve that, you've failed. And quite often they might be the only person trying to change culture and, you know, do all of this stuff, which is unrealistic when like the technological aspect, for example, like there's no competency around that, is there? Like how do we, or experience design is like a really small percentage, but actually that's the capability organizations need the most.
I think what's important is not
and it's not either or, otherwise I'd be breaking my own.
No, and I'm not suggesting that you are saying this, but I think unfortunately we need to distinguish the difference between having structure and how granular our understanding of that structure needs to be. Right now, there are competencies that have been defined by the CXPA, but there are also competencies that have been defined by Forrester, that have been defined by Bain, that have been defined by a number of different organizations, that the articulation in most cases is slightly different, but they're broadly along the same lines, but there are differences between them all. The problem comes back to what I said about customer experience not being an exact science. And it's one of the reasons why I am a massive advocate of simplicity in the way that we think about this. Too many are radically overcomplicating their approach to customer
experience. Back to being political again, isn't it? The radical, it's like the right wing CXs, the left wing CXs.
It's just too complex. And the thing is, you cannot overcomplicate this because, as you rightly say, every organization is different, every industry is different, every geography is different. And so what different parts of the world, different markets, different sectors focus on will depend, you know.
Absolutely.
And because it depends, I think for us as practitioners, whether it be in the human experience, customer experience, employee experience, whatever you want to call it, our strength is in interpreting what is the right thing to do for that organization in the situation that it's in, to enable it to deliver value. And if that value will come from being customer centric, because it has to be, and it has to be because differentiation in that market, differentiating on the product or service isn't going to be enough. It has to be on the whole experience, then that is right for that situation. If it's a scenario where actually it's a very limited marketplace and you've got a very innovative product that actually you can differentiate on that, then again, you do what's right for that situation. But I agree with you, there is no one size fits all. You know, there can't be. And that's why the best practitioners are the ones that can adapt to each situation as they see it.
Yeah. I know Adrian Swinscoe, his metaphor always sticks out to me. It's like picking up this CX hammer and thinking everything's a nail.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
trying to
that's right.
do that. That's the wrong approach.
It's one of the reasons my framework is so ridiculously simple, because it has to be. But because if you make anything more complicated than that, it becomes the hammer and nail, and it is not.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time and we didn't even get through half the questions, but I've really enjoyed this debate.
Well, should we agree to do a phase two?
Part two. Yeah, because like now I'm feeling all inspired and thinking about the Wix Practical Magic course and actually like Wix competencies. Why can't we have our own competencies? And I honestly get so frustrated. Last thing I'll say on the kind of like CX community, and this is probably like broader LinkedIn space, is like I get sick of people that are just like complaining
Yes.
about, oh, this guy over here or this group over here, or it's this fault or it's that fault. I definitely don't want to participate in that. And obviously this safe space, it's been great to be able to share some of my points of view and opinion. The important thing is, if you don't like it, go and
find your own
work on something
totally
and
agree.
share it back with the world if there's a better
Totally
way, rather than just moaning about it or pointing fingers
Absolutely.
at people.
Do you know, the thing is, Claire, I would say, as
So I'm
my
going to come up
final
with a better
thought to
way.
you, my final thought to you is, I think part of the problem is thinking about this as competencies.
Yeah.
You know, I think it would be fascinating to know what the women in CX model was.
Maybe I think, but we're not saying CX competencies, so are we saying WIX competencies? So for women in CX,
what's the
what are the
model? What's the
capabilities? Yeah.
approach?
I'm gonna come up with it, and I'm gonna come and share it back with you in this part 2.
Amazing.
But as this is the end of 2023 and the show will be airing in December, my final question is, what's one prediction then that you have for 2024? And we can come back in 2024 and continue this very healthy debate.
So I will give you a prediction, and I'm going to finish with a quote, if that's okay.
Of course.
My prediction is that we will become even more obsessed with technology. Unfortunately, not always for the right reason. So the AI bandwagon is not going to slow down. It is going to speed up. And I think we're going to have to work even harder to ensure it's not being used for the wrong reason. That is my prediction for 2024. So actually, our community is going to have to manage that very openly to ensure it doesn't damage experiences. So that is a prediction for 2024. To give you a closing quote, which I said I would do, because I think it wraps all of this quite nicely. The other prediction I have for 2024 is, it's not the first time I've said this, but because of everything that's going on in the world, I think the greater the ability for people and organizations to demonstrate that people can trust them, the better. I think we have lost so much trust over the last few years. You know, in the UK alone, we've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, we've got a global cost of living crisis. All of those things have almost eroded trust completely. And that has a knock-on effect to every organization that you interact with. Who do we believe? You know, can we believe the organization? Can we believe the media? I think it's almost gone, and we've got to find a way of bringing it back. And I had a brilliant conversation with a lady yesterday, who I will connect you with, Claire, because she'd be a brilliant addition to the WIX community, who said to me that the most important thing for her in 2024 is authenticity. And this is authenticity in individuals, but also from entire organizations. And the quote, so it's not mine, this is a quote from a brilliant lady called Sylvia Beraldo. She said, authenticity is the currency of trust in any relationship. And I love that quote. And I think we need to do what we can to demonstrate what authenticity really is. You know that's what I try to do. I know that's what you try to do.
One of our core values at Women in CX.
That the more your community and others demonstrate authenticity in practice, the more we can influence others to do the same.
Love that. What a great note to end on. So we talked about so much. I really enjoyed having the safe space to be able to intellectually challenge one another around some of these thoughts. It's been really, really fun. Can't wait for the next installment. And yeah, just I think demonstrating what it's like to be in a psychologically safe space to talk about those kinds of things. It was a joy. So thank you, Ian, for joining us on the Inspiring Women in CX podcast.
Always a pleasure, Claire. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone who listened, wherever you are. We'll be back for part 2 soon. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Inspiring Women in CX podcast with me, Clare Muscat. If you enjoyed the episode and you don't already, please do drop us a like and subscribe to our channel. The bigger the following, the bigger the impact we can create on our mission to amplify the voices of women working in CX and technology. Well, that's all for now. Join us again next time, where I'll be talking to the incredibly inspiring Andrina Lian, a lived experience speaker, about why empathy might not be the answer we're looking for, recognising our own privilege and the concept of intersectionality. See you all very soon.